John MacRae blew out 3 candles on a cake Molly had baked for his 40th birthday. Molly said she would never be able to fit all 40 candles on his cake, but the 3 candles represented their 3 years of marriage. Life was good for the MacRaes. John MacRae's years of commanding men, along with his business education and experience, helped him advance at the Homestake Mine. John MacRae was eventually promoted to the position of mine superintendent. He became a respected citizen in Deadwood and considered running for a political office in the not-too-distant future. They built a 2-story frame home 2 miles west of Deadwood. Molly MacRae's dress shop thrived. Her mother taught her to be a skilled seamstress, and she became a talented designer of women's fashions. The women in Deadwood seemed to have forgotten Molly's past and accepted her into their circles. John and Molly had a little girl, and they named her Bonnie. She had blonde, curly hair. John MacRae told Molly that his mother had blonde hair. He told Molly that he finally got the blonde hair he had wished for. John MacRae said, "Molly, this cake is really good. Do you remember the first meal you ever cooked for me?" "I certainly do," said Molly as she smiled at her husband. "Oh, by the way, the mine is sending me out to Chicago next week to look at some new drilling equipment. Would you mind if I take a few extra days and visited my mother? I won't be gone more than 2 weeks. White Eagle can look in on you and Bonnie," said John MacRae. "Not at all. Say, Johnny, why don't you call White Eagle John like everyone else does?" said Molly as she stood up and put her arms around her husband. "Well, just a habit, I guess. It was White Eagle who saved me, not John Eagleton," said John MacRae as he kissed Molly on her cheek. The following week, John MacRae boarded a train for Chicago. Molly and Bonnie went to the station to see him off. This was the first time John MacRae would be away from Molly since they were married. It was 1893, and although Deadwood had become relatively civilized, he had a nervous feeling about leaving his wife and daughter alone. Molly hugged John MacRae and then kissed him and said, "I love you, Johnny. We will miss you." His mother and Molly were the only 2 people who ever called him Johnny. John MacRae touched Molly's raven black hair, then stepped into the passenger car. He sat by a window and watched Molly wave to him as the train started to move. Bonnie fell asleep in Molly's arms. John MacRae began to get a nervous feeling he just could not shake. Jordan Stone was released from the infamous Penitenciaria Nacional in Buenos Aires after serving a 4-year sentence for stealing horses. Jordan Stone always admired his father, but George Stone doted on his son Jacob. Jordan Stone moved to South America and then on to Argentina to build a cattle ranch in an effort to prove his worth to his father. Jordan Stone had a weakness for gambling and eventually gambled away all of his working capital. He fell in with bad company and ended up getting caught with a herd of stolen horses. He was sentenced to 4 years of hard labor in a Penitenciaria Nacional. His partners in crime were not so lucky. They were also tried for robbing a bank where a teller was shot and killed. They were both promptly hung. George Stone had written to his son Jordan and said he wanted him to move back home after serving his sentence. He was having problems with his other son Jacob. He wanted someone to leave his ranch to, and it was becoming apparent that Jacob Stone would not be that person. This was the last communication Jordan Stone had with his father in almost a year. Immediately after arriving in San Francisco, Jordan Stone telegraphed his father in South Dakota. He received a telegram back from George Stone's attorney, Harold Warner. The telegram briefly described his father's suicide and his brother's demise. The telegram went on to state that George Stone's ranch fell into a state of disrepair and was eventually sold for back taxes. Jordan Stone took the news of his father's suicide and the loss of his inheritance badly. He stayed in a drunken stupor for a week before boarding a train for South Dakota. Jordan Stone resembled his brother Jacob. He was tall and had the same angular features. Jordan was muscular and fit from his years of hard labor in prison. His blond hair was long and he had a beard with flecks of gray in it. The 4 years in prison hardened and changed Jordan Stone. He survived the hellhole of the Penitenciaria Nacional, but in order to survive, he ended up killing 3 fellow prisoners. Killing to survive did not bother him. If he were alive, George Stone would not have recognized his son Jordan anymore. Jordan Stone did not possess the nervous demeanor that Jacob had. He had a menacing look in his steel blue eyes. Jordan Stone took on an evil persona. He cared about nothing. When Jordan Stone arrived in Deadwood, he bought a horse and saddle from a local livery. Jordan Stone then visited John Eagleton's store and purchased an 1873 Winchester rifle along with a Colt single-action revolver. He also bought several boxes of cartridges along with 2 hunting knives and extra clothing. One of the knives had an elkhorn handle. From the attorney's telegram, Jordan Stone knew that John Eagleton was the owner of the store and who he was. John Eagleton was not aware of who his customer was, but he had a strange feeling they had met somewhere before. Jordan Stone kept a low profile when in Deadwood. He made discreet inquiries about his father's and brother's demise. Jordan Stone concluded that if John MacRae would have not interfered, his father would still be alive and he would be the heir to the George Stone Ranch. He did not care if an innocent Indian would hang. He was also not concerned about his brother Jacob. He would have killed Jacob if he had to. Jordan Stone blamed John MacRae for his misfortunes and vowed to get even. He bought 1 more horse and then left Deadwood. He camped in a wooded area on the outskirts of Deadwood. The nights were cold, but were like paradise compared to the hellhole of the Penitenciaria Nacional. Jordan Stone remembered his father talking about an Indian lover in his troop. He began plotting his revenge on John MacRae. This Indian lover would deeply regret the day he interfered in the Stones' affairs. John MacRae arrived back in Deadwood in the early evening. He had hoped that Molly and Bonnie would be there to meet him. It was cold with snow flurries in the air, along with a few inches of snow on the ground. Maybe it was better that Molly did not venture out with Bonnie. John MacRae stopped by John Eagleton's store to borrow White Eagle's rig. White Eagle said, "I stopped at your place a few days ago. Molly and Bonnie were doing just fine. You are a very fortunate man to have such a beautiful family." John MacRae mounted the rig. He shook White Eagle's hand and said, "I'm well aware of how lucky I am. Many thanks for keeping an eye on them." John MacRae headed west out of Deadwood to his home. It started to snow heavily and the sun was setting. He was glad that Molly did not meet him. While John MacRae visited his mother in Milwaukee, he bought a gold ring with 3 diamonds on it for Molly and a small doll for Bonnie. He promised Molly to replace the small gold band he gave her when they got married. It was a diamond for each year they were married. As John MacRae approached his home, he noticed that no lights were on anywhere and no smoke came out of the chimney. The nervous feeling he had when he left on his trip returned. He spurred the horse on towards his home. John MacRae entered his home. It was dark and cold inside. He moved around in the darkness and called for Molly, but no one answered him. John MacRae fumbled for a lamp that was on a table and lit it. As the lamp started to illuminate the room, he looked in horror at the table. On the table was a note with spots of blood on it. The note was pinned to the table with a hunting knife. The hunting knife had an elkhorn handle. What struck unspeakable terror into John MacRae was a bloody finger lying next to the knife. The finger had a gold band on it. It was Molly's finger. John MacRae screamed loudly and then read the note. John MacRae, you ruined my life with your interference in my family's business. Now you will pay. I have your wife and daughter. I want $50,000 in cash. I know you control the mine's gold shipments and have access to cash. Steal the cash if you must. Deposit the cash in the Sundance State Bank in 1 week, and you will be told where to find your wife. Come alone. If you do not, I will kill them very slowly. You know I mean it by the souvenir I left for you. Jordan Stone. From his gun cabinet, John MacRae retrieved an 1873 44-40 Winchester rifle and an 1873 45 Colt revolver, along with the correct cartridges for each firearm. He packed some warm clothing and saddled Mac along with Molly's horse. John MacRae headed into Deadwood. The weather cleared and the many stars in the sky appeared like diamonds shimmering in a jeweler's case. John MacRae thought of the ring he was going to give to Molly. John MacRae arrived at John Eagleston's store just as the sun was rising. He knocked loudly on the front door of the store and woke White Eagle up. White Eagle opened the door and was startled by John MacRae's grim appearance. He said, "What happened, John? You look like you've just seen the devil." With tears in his eyes, John MacRae said, "Much worse, my friend." Then he told White Eagle what happened. White Eagle shook his head and said, "Oh my God, now I know who that person was. About a week ago, someone came in and bought some firearms. He also bought a knife with an elkhorn handle. He looked familiar, but I couldn't place the man. It must have been Jordan Stone. Now that I think of it, he did resemble Jacob Stone. I never knew Jacob had a brother." "Neither did I," said John MacRae. "He looked like a mean one. What are you going to do, John?" said White Eagle. "I'd like to leave my horses here and borrow your rig. I'm going to the mine today and work as if nothing happened. I have access to all the gold shipments leaving the mine and also the cash on hand. $50,000 in cash will be easy enough to transport," said John MacRae. White Eagle bit his upper lip and said, "So you are going to steal $50,000 in cash?" "I'm just going to borrow the cash. I have to play Stone's game if I want to see my family again. No one must ever know about Stone taking Molly. He must have Deadwoods. He may have friends in Deadwood. Go see Judge Wilkins for me. Judge Wilkins and I have become good friends. You can confide in the judge and tell him what happened. He may be able to find out more about Jordan Stone," said John MacRae. "I'll go see the judge first thing in the morning. I want to go with you to Sundance. You do not want to travel alone," said White Eagle as he put his hand on John MacRae's shoulder. John MacRae went to work at the Homestake mine at his usual time. He spent the morning in a meeting describing the new drilling equipment he was shown. The president of the mine asked John MacRae if he was all right. "Why do you ask?" said John MacRae. "You look a bit out of sorts, John. Why don't you go home and get some rest? We could finish this tomorrow," said the president. "I'm okay, just a bit tired from the trip. If you don't mind, I'd like to stay a little later tonight and finish my report on the new drilling equipment. Maybe then I can take the next 2 days off if that's okay with you, sir," said John MacRae. "That will be just fine with me. Please give Molly my regards," said the president. He did not notice John MacRae's lip quiver slightly when he mentioned Molly. John MacRae worked at his desk until dark. By then, everyone had left for the day except for the guards. John MacRae went over to the vault where the cash and gold shipments were stored. He asked the guard on duty to check one of the nearby shafts for water seepage while he took inventory of the recent shipment. John MacRae was now alone in the vault. He opened the vault and removed $50,000 in cash. John MacRae knew that the vault would remain closed for the next 3 days until the next shipment was scheduled to leave. He left a note telling the bank president to go see Judge Wilkins for an explanation of what was happening. John MacRae loaded the cash into White Eagle's rig. It was almost midnight when he arrived at John Eagleton's store. White Eagle told John MacRae about his visit with Judge Wilkins. Although somewhat reluctant, the judge agreed with John MacRae's plan. He agreed to tell the Homestake Mines president what was happening. Judge Wilkins was willing to go one step further and stand behind John MacRae's loan of the cash. He knew that John MacRae had no choice in what he was doing. White Eagle said that the judge stopped by his store later in the day with information about Jordan Stone. The judge told of Jordan Stone's prison sentence in South America and of the 3 men Jordan Stone had killed. George Stone never spoke of Jordan Stone to anyone. Judge Wilkins received this information from George Stone's attorney, Harold Warner. At first, Harold Warner refused to give the judge any information, claiming attorney-client privilege. After Judge Wilkins reminded Harold Warner of some of Warner's unscrupulous practices that the judge had overlooked, Harold Warner gladly cooperated. White Eagle helped John MacRae pack for their trip. John MacRae and White Eagle left before sunrise for Sundance, Wyoming. It was less than 50 miles. They rode in White Eagle's rig. Mac and Molly's horses were hitched behind the rig. That evening, John MacRae and White Eagle set up a tent and camped in a wooded area 2 miles from Sundance. Not a word was said as they both sat by a small fire and ate a cold meal of beef jerky and sourdough biscuits. John MacRae had a few sips of whiskey. He offered the bottle to his companion, but White Eagle declined. Both men did not sleep very well that night. The next morning, John MacRae said, "I think it's best if I go into Sundance alone." White Eagle nodded and said, "Just be careful." John MacRae drove White Eagle's rig into Sundance, Wyoming, and looked for the Sundance State Bank. It was a 2-story brick building located on one of the main streets in Sundance. John MacRae entered the building and asked to see the bank's president. A short, portly man in a wrinkled frock coat greeted John MacRae and said, "I'm Phineas Peabody, president. State your business." John MacRae could smell whiskey on the man and immediately became suspicious. John MacRae said, "My name's MacRae. I'm here to make a deposit." "Ah, yes, we knew you'd be coming. Where is the deposit?" "Right here in this strong box." "I suggest we go into your office," said John MacRae firmly. "Follow me," said Phineas Peabody, as beads of perspiration began to appear on his forehead. John MacRae followed Peabody into the president's office. It smelled of whiskey and perspiration. John MacRae unlocked the strong box, and Peabody counted out $50,000 in cash. "When will this money be picked up?" said John MacRae. "Oh, it won't be picked up. We'll be sending a wire transfer to the recipient. Once he acknowledges the transfer, I am to give you a letter. He told me to tell you that if it does not appear to be the correct wire transfer, you know what will happen," said Phineas Peabody. John MacRae said, "Just where will this wire transfer be sent to?" Phineas Peabody snickered and said, "Hell, I can't give that information out." John MacRae angrily drew his Colt revolver out of the holster and placed the barrel just above the bridge of Phineas Peabody's nose. He said, "Listen, you son of a bitch, you may not know it, but you are becoming an accessory to kidnapping and maybe even murder. Tell me where the wire transfer is going, or I'll blow your brains out right here and now." He pulled the hammer on his Colt to full cock and pressed the barrel firmly against Peabody's eyes. Peabody heard the 4 clicks from the hammer cocking and felt the cold barrel of the Colt on his forehead. Perspiration began to pour out of his forehead. He promptly said, "The wire transfer is going to the First National Bank in Sheridan." A cold chill ran down John MacRae's spine. Sheridan, Wyoming was over 130 miles from Sundance. He now began to see what Jordan Stone had planned and began to doubt if he would ever see his family alive again. John MacRae said, "Sheridan, where's the letter I'm supposed to get?" "I'm not supposed to give you the letter until the wire transfer goes through," said Peabody. "Give me the damn letter or take your last breath," said John MacRae as he pressed his Colt firmly against the president's forehead. "Here it is," said Phineas Peabody. John MacRae opened the envelope and read the letter. "Follow the old mining trail north of Sundance for around 10 miles. You will see a shack built into a bluff. Your woman will be there. Jordan Stone." John MacRae now knew that he had played Jordan Stone's game and lost. Now listen carefully. There's not going to be any wire transfer. This money was for my family's ransom. He never intended for me to find my family alive. You can put all that money back in the strongbox. If you tell anybody about our little conversation here, I will personally come back and put a bullet in your head. Do you understand me?" said John MacRae. Phineas Peabody nervously said, "Yes, I understand." As he lowered his Colt and holstered it, John MacRae said, "I sure hope so." Before John MacRae left Sundance, he stopped at the Western Union office. He sent a telegram to the First National Bank in Sheridan, Wyoming, to the attention of Jordan Stone. The telegram read, "Prepare to spend eternity in hell." Their camp was close to an old mining trail. John MacRae thought it best to take White Eagle with him in case of an ambush. It was cold and it started to snow heavily. John MacRae left Sundance and headed for their camp. White Eagle was packed and ready to leave. As they rode together in the rig, John MacRae told White Eagle about his visit to the bank. They had difficulty following the old mining trail. Off in the distance, White Eagle noticed a bluff starting to appear. Nowhere in sight was any shack. John MacRae hurriedly got off of White Eagle's rig and mounted Mac. He spurred Mac towards the bluff. John MacRae finally spotted the shack behind some trees and dismounted. It was not much more than a few logs and boards piled together against a hole dug into the side of the bluff. The roof was covered with sod. John MacRae's heart sunk as he approached the shack. He opened a crude door fashioned from the bottom of a wagon. He walked in, and cowering in a corner was Molly. She was awake and shivering under a piece of dirty canvas. Molly was filthy and had bruises on her face. Molly recognized John MacRae and tried to speak to him, but she was too weak. John MacRae held Molly in his arms, and she passed out. She sobbed loudly. John MacRae did not see his daughter Bonnie anywhere in the small shack. He began to resign himself to his daughter's fate. White Eagle entered the shack. He had seen some terrible things happen during his lifetime, but seeing his friend's wife in such a state left him speechless. He finally said, "I'll build a fire. We need to warm her and feed her." Deep down, White Eagle wondered if Molly could be saved. John MacRae stayed with Molly while White Eagle went into Sundance to get food and supplies. It was 3 full days before Molly was able to respond. When Molly was finally able to speak, she started sobbing hysterically. John MacRae held her tightly and gently stroked her forehead. After Molly stopped crying, she spoke slowly and softly. Molly said, "Johnny, we lost Bonnie." "I know, my dear," said John MacRae. In broken sentences, Molly slowly told John MacRae about her abduction. Jordan Stone broke into their home 2 hours after White Eagle's last visit. Jordan Stone told Molly who he was. He knew that his brother had been with Molly. Jordan Stone laughed when he savagely cut off Molly's ring finger. He then forced Molly to ride a horse without a saddle and carry Bonnie in her arms. Molly said they rode all day and night. They hardly stopped at all and ate along the way. It was cold and snowed heavily at times. They only had one small blanket between them. Molly wrapped Bonnie in the blanket, but it was not enough. Molly could not keep Bonnie warm. Bonnie began to develop a fever and shivered violently. Molly pleaded with Jordan Stone to stop and build a fire, but he laughed and refused. On the third day of travel, Bonnie passed away. Molly begged Jordan Stone to let her bury Bonnie. Jordan Stone again laughed and refused. He took Bonnie's lifeless body from Molly and let it fall to the ground. That evening they arrived at the small shack. Jordan Stone built a large fire. He tried to take advantage of Molly. Molly resisted and she said she would kill herself. Jordan Stone beat her until she passed out. The next morning, Jordan Stone went into Sundance to arrange the wire transfer. Molly never saw Jordan Stone again. Molly said, "He left me for dead. I had no food or blankets, no way to make a fire. I was sure that I was going to die. I knew you would find me, and I wanted to live long enough to tell you what happened. He killed Bonnie and me." John MacRae held Molly to his chest and said, "You will not die on me, Molly." A violent rage he had never known before was building in John MacRae's chest. John MacRae and White Eagle took Molly to a hotel in Sundance and spent another week caring for her. When she finally appeared strong enough to travel, John MacRae walked over to White Eagle and said, "I want you to take Molly back to Deadwood. Molly can stay with Judge Wilkins' wife until she gets her strength back. Take the cash in the strong box back to the mine." White Eagle looked puzzled and said, "Why, aren't you returning with us? Where are you going?" John MacRae stood up, looked off to the west, and said, "I'm going after the devil that killed my daughter." Molly heard the conversation and screamed, "No, no, you can't go after him. He is truly evil. You are no match for him. Let it go, Johnny. Please stay with me. I need you." John MacRae ignored Molly's plea and said, "I will not rest until Jordan Stone burns in hell." Jordan Stone rose early and ordered a big breakfast. He smiled slightly as he ate and congratulated himself for planning the revenge on John MacRae. Today, Jordan Stone would become a wealthy man. When John MacRae finds his dead wife, he will be over 130 miles away. Jordan Stone finished his breakfast and went over to the hotel's bar to have a drink while he waited for the First National Bank to open. He finished his second glass of whiskey and heard the bar's clock chime 9 a.m. It was payday time. Jordan Stone entered the First National Bank and asked for the manager. A tall, thin man wearing a black frock coat nervously greeted him. Jordan Stone had sent a wire to the bank yesterday to alert them of the upcoming wire transfer. Although Jordan Stone tried his best to be friendly, the manager became very fearful of Stone. Jordan Stone shook the manager's hand and said, "How much money was transferred over?" The manager said, "Let's go into our boardroom, sir." Jordan Stone followed the manager into a plush, mahogany-paneled boardroom and impatiently said, "How much?" The manager was shaking when he handed Jordan Stone the telegram from John MacRae. Jordan Stone read the telegram. "Prepare to spend eternity in hell." Although the telegram was unsigned, Jordan Stone immediately knew who sent it. He knew there would be no wire transfer. Jordan Stone flew into a violent rage and drew his Colt out of the holster. He pointed the pistol at the manager and said, "What do you know about this, you skinny bastard?" The manager trembled and said, "Nothing. We received this telegram just before we opened today. We immediately sent a reply to the bank in Sundance, but received no answer. I swear it. Don't hurt me. Please put your gun down. Jordan Stone waved his Colt at the manager and said, "If you breathe one word of my visit here to anyone, I will come back and kill you. Do you understand? Do you hear me?" "Yes, sir," said the manager as he fainted. Jordan Stone holstered his revolver and left the First National Bank. He was furious that there was no wire transfer. Jordan Stone had planned to go south to Mexico, where he would never be found. Now, with almost no money left, his plans would have to change. He was certain that John MacRae would come after him. Jordan Stone decided to capture John MacRae and force John MacRae to help him rob the Homestake mine. Then he would kill John MacRae slowly. Jordan Stone used what was left of his money to purchase another horse, along with supplies and a small tent. He returned to the First National Bank and asked to see the manager. Jordan Stone was told that the manager had resigned and left for California. One of the senior tellers was put temporarily in charge until a new manager could be hired. The senior teller was not aware of Jordan Stone or the failed wire transfer. The senior teller walked up to Jordan Stone and said, "How can I help you, sir?" Jordan Stone smiled and said, "My name is Stone. I'll be looking at some property in Buffalo. Can you recommend a bank in Buffalo to deal with?" The senior teller smiled and said, "Oh, we have a branch in Buffalo. They will take good care of you." "Well, many thanks, sir. I'll be leaving for Buffalo today," said Jordan Stone as he shook the senior teller's hand. He was certain that John MacRae would contact the First National Bank in Sheridan. He was also sure that John MacRae would be told about his inquiry regarding a bank in Buffalo. Jordan Stone left immediately for Buffalo, Wyoming. John MacRae went to the telegraph office in Sundance and sent a wire to the First National Bank in Sheridan inquiring about Jordan Stone. He was surprised when the reply mentioned Jordan Stone traveling to Buffalo, Wyoming to look at property. He went back to the hotel and told White Eagle about the reply. White Eagle says, "It has to be a trap. Why would Stone leave such an easy trail to follow? He could also be headed far away from Buffalo and is trying to mislead you." "I'm certain that devil will be waiting for me in Buffalo," said John MacRae. Molly again heard their conversation. She walked over to John MacRae and said, "Johnny, please don't go." John MacRae put his arms around Molly and said, "I have to finish this. I cannot risk Jordan Stone returning to Deadwood." Tears welled up in Molly's eyes and she said, "Oh my God, he might be bold enough to do that. Well, at least hire some men to go with you." "I best do this myself," said John MacRae. He hugged his sobbing wife goodbye and thanked White Eagle for his help. White Eagle and Molly headed back to Deadwood. John MacRae purchased another horse and more supplies. It was almost dusk when he began his journey to Buffalo, Wyoming. He decided to head due west through Gillette, Wyoming, which was previously named Donkeytown. Riding at a normal pace, this was a 4-day trip. John MacRae intended to do it in 2 days. His years of experience in the cavalry would help. John MacRae tried to remain cautious and vigilant. He continually looked over his shoulder to make sure he was not being followed. The trip to Buffalo was uneventful. With virtually no sleep in 2 days, John MacRae arrived at the outskirts of Buffalo on the morning of the second day. At 40 years of age, John MacRae was still fit and in good physical condition, but he did not possess the stamina of a young cavalry lieutenant anymore. In his rage to bring Jordan Stone to justice, he had pushed himself way beyond his capabilities. John MacRae wanted to be alert and fresh, so he decided to rest for a bit before going into the town of Buffalo. He would soon deeply regret this decision.